I'd like to take this time to welcome the family that are here to suffering. As we go to seek the Lord in prayer, through this spiritual program that we prepare with the President, may our good Lord continue to bless us, each and every one of us here, and your family, while we fellowship this year. Once again, you are most welcome to Faleloa Church. Koe wholawhalahimi o whiri, ke tau hiwa whawhetai e ki e whiawhikoini, tahaya ai ngahi himi. Ka wale mo wakahi whapeke himi koini, ko tahaya e ngahi liliu, himi ai tangata eiki ke koe hoaia, o i kaunanga ko ne tōtau i Faleloa, ko tahaya e ngahi liliu himi i he siasi, tau hiwa i he hawan. O whaamo pe te uspela tu pe ai mesi uluati, te kātaki pe, te uspela hoko te pe, ko ngā ku kage maua e mea ngāua ke whaia no uluatu e tau himi, ka me moani, te uspela tātaha tu pe, a ngahi kupu te kātaki, te tau hiwa tātaha mai mea. Te au, whaamo furu maha wālo e himi, taha, wha wālo e himi. Ne ua mai e ki ho hui, ka leo whakawhisi, eiki ke ofa o te whai, ke unu pe ke ofi. Eiki taki ki he kolosi, nā ke piki ai, ke wofi kia te koe eiki, tā tāne ringi. Mau e tā whaparo himi mo ka taki me haki ki rau himo.
Pe whakatapu ki e whanau mai whamapuna o Pearl Tolhurst. Ai o nau I tēni mo I tātou e whewhini, e whaita wot whawhetaki. Tau I ka whae koini, o ne kirikira ki a wakatau mai, kirikira ki pou, ta mo ne hoko koe mama, koe taki ama, koe whiru taki ama, o Latu, I Moimoi. Greetings and words of welcome to all of you, especially to all the Tolhurst who are here today. And on behalf of His Majesty, I as the Governor, on behalf of His Majesty and the Government of Tonga, I do welcome all of you to Hawaii, and especially to Faleloa, and at this time, it is my great pleasure to have met you and also to extend to you this most sincere welcome, especially when I was given the information for the reason of your visit. Of course, I grew up and I remember seeing the graveyard of your great-grandmother when we were very little. And my father told us a little that he knew about the story. And of course, later on, as you have heard, that my family, especially my grandfather, was the founder of the Seventh-day Adventist in Tonga, here in Faleloa. And he was a very good friend with the missionaries, including the Tolhurst. And when Paul died in 1919, that was during the war Blake. Then my grandfather asked the family to be buried on our land. And that land belongs to, I am inheriting the land now as the head of the broker tribe. And I'm very pleased. The land has been blessed with pearl. And so to all of you, we are here today to celebrate. We are not crying, we are happy. We're happy because pearl is in heaven. And from now on, I will let you know that every time you look at that side, that's the western side of Hawaii, and that's where Moimoi is, that's where pearl is, especially in a starry night, you will see a sparkling star. And that star, I named it Pearl Tolhurst. And she's there to remind us, as a messenger of the gospel, of the good news of Jesus Christ, this land, this country is blessed with message that the Tolhurst brought to Tonga, together with other missionaries as well. While the construction was still on this building here, the King of Tonga, His Majesty, asked me if he wanted to visit Moimoi. So we followed his royal mobile and we came here. When we stood there, and he asked the driver to stop. And then I went up to him and asked him, and he asked me, what is this? And I told him that that's the new building for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And because he knew the connection with my grandfather. And he said, it's a good thing that every time everywhere there's a church in Tonga, it's a sign of safety. And it's good for Tonga. And so I want you to know that His Majesty is very pleased that this building is here as part of the, not just the spiritual life of Tonga, but also the protection for the safety of Tonga. Anyway, in short, I'd like to present you with a sonnet. I'm a Shakespearean sonnet writer, and I write in many languages, especially in Tongan, but I try to put this together in English for you. And I wrote this sonnet called Tolhurst. As the sun rises in the eastern sky, flocks and fauna get up for new day. While bluefin and big eye signed in, Moimoi Deep is ready for start. More than 100 years ago, messengers of the good news arrived. Message of love, hope, and peace. Cornerstones of island Christianity. As Latu and Apple took up development, Hawaii, the leader of the movement, Tawahau, the Tuhapai, took the throne. 1845, crowning as first Christian king of Tonga. Tolhurst, the rising sun of Moimoi Hawaii. Pearl Tolhurst is today the guardian angel of Moimoi. And this is in honor of the Tolhurst family, and as a granddaughter, the grandson of Paula. Reminds me of the connection. And I'm very proud to say that my grandfather was the founder of Seventh-day Adventist in Tonga. And during the Centennial of Paula College, I was invited to be the guest speaker because of that connection. And to you, Roger, and all the Tolhurst, we are very pleased. And please take this on it. Maybe you'll decorate it somewhere, and that's our gift. And our loving memory of Pearl Tolhurst, the guardian angel of Moimoi. Of art.
Our scripture reading for today will be taken from the book of John 14, verse 1 to 6. John chapter 14, verse 1 to 6, it says, "Let not your heart be troubled. Believe in God, please believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, I will go and prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, you may be also. And where I go, you know, the way you know." Thomas said unto him, "Lord, we know not whither you go, and how can we know the way?" Jesus said unto him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man come unto the Father but by me." Amen.
Just a special acknowledgement to Pastor Tolhurst, his daughter, and his nephew, for making it all the way to Faleloa so we can be here and celebrate the 100th year Centennial of the passing of late Margaret Davis. And we are so delighted to have you with us as a church, as government, and also as people of this community of Faleloa. And we are here today to celebrate, not to grieve anymore. Amen. The life of a pioneer like here, I can imagine thinking back 100 years from here, from today, back then, to what was like, you know, the suffering, the pain that she had to go through because of this deadly disease, the sickness that she went through to the point of her death. And, you know, it's quite sad, but we praise God for having such a person full of commitment like her to save our community, our ancestors here in Faleloa back in the days. Who knows, it could be some of our great-grandparents back in the days that they were saving during this time of sickness and this hard time. Anyway, we're here today, you know, to celebrate and to have this memorial service for Margaret Gladys Tolhurst, who came as a missionary and died here in the village of Faleloa 100 years ago. You know, when we go through the Bible, especially the Old Testament, just a little halfway, you know, the Old Testament, we find the book of Ecclesiastes. Tradition tells us the writer, in fact, chapter 1, verse 1 tells us that the writer of this book was King Solomon, the son of David. You know, the complex theological and philosophical reflection in this book is one of the deepest insights into human life. Not only in the Bible, but anywhere in literature or history. Perhaps the best and known section of the book reflects on the variety of life and how different emotions and events occur throughout our lives, over which we have little or no control of it. You know, chapter 3, for example, and I'm going to read a few verses out. Verse 1, there is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. Time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. Verse 7, a time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. You know, we're here today joined together in the common bond of grief, and not so much to dwell on the grief part, you know, but to remember the sacrifice of Margaret Tolhurst. You know, in many ways the hardest part of grief is the remembering of those who are gone from us. Yet today, we gather specifically to remember our loved ones. Whether family or friend, neighbor, or even colleague, you know, none of us, I like to make this statement clear, none of us here today is alone. You know, this statement may bring particular comfort to any of you or any of us who come here today on your own. Although we grieve for different people, our grief is shared. You know, a proverb says, grief shared is half grief. The time of grief and mourning can be an uncertain time, both in terms of its length and also knowing how others or we feel or react to. You know, I like how C.S. Lewis put it. He observed after the death of his wife, and he was resentful if people asked him how he was, as he often wanted to be alone. You know, it's quite common. You know, if a loved one passed away, tell us that you just want to be alone. You want just to be left alone. You know, you try to regather your life, and that's what happened to him. He just wanted to be alone in his thoughts and didn't know how to even begin to answer the question. But he was just as resentful when people listened to this, when people didn't ask after him or observing that, you know, and he came to this, and I'm quoting, no one ever told me that grief felt so much like fear. That's how he felt about it. You know, grief is in one way a costly consequence of love. You know, the writer Hilary Stanton observes that the risk of love is loss, and the price of loss is grief. We grieve because we feel the pain of loss, but we also grieve because the strength of our love for the person that we have come here to remember today. Amen? And if we spend the rest of the day talking about, reminiscing in all the things that Bill Tolhurst and the husband Hubert did back then to our communities, to our people, you know, and I'm sure we can all come to one conclusion: it was their love. It was their love for Christ and their love for our people back in those days. That love continues to grieve, and grief does not diminish it. And often in 10 months after death, we feel that love even stronger, you know, than we did before. And so what brings us here ultimately today is not grief. And I want you to listen. It is not grief that brings us here today, but it is love. Love for the person that has died, love that carries on in spite of her death. And I'm sure the family knows all about this. Love that will carry on. With love there's always hope. The greatest love is that the love of God for us. A love that never diminishes and never dies, because it is a love of the Creator to His created children. In the words of our reading from John's Gospel today, we see the hope that can grow out of love. We see Jesus explaining to His disciples, even though they don't know, they don't understand it yet, that He must go away from them, that He must die, so that His work can be finished, and so that the place can be prepared ahead for them in heaven. You know, Thomas, a bit of a character. One of Jesus' disciples was always the disciple who was willing to ask the praying questions that the other disciples, perhaps, they were foolish to ask. You know, after hearing Jesus explaining this, that He was going away and that they know the way. And here comes Thomas. Thomas is willing to admit his ignorance and say, I don't know the way. But how can I know? He said. And listen to Jesus. Jesus' answer is simple and yet very profound. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And that is the hope for the future, friends. That is our hope. The best answer to the big question of life and death are to be found in the God who created us. The God who came to have as Jesus to show us the way to return to Him again. And the God who goes ahead of us to prepare a place for us in eternity with Him, if we will but acknowledge His presence and His glory. You know, today we are not alone. We meet together to share our grief, to share our love and joy, and to remember the person who sacrifices her life for the sake of our people, sick people of Faleloa 100 years ago. Paula, Tolhurst, and her husband went out of their way to care and to offer special care to the very much needed people and people who were of Faleloa that they were struggling with these deadly sickness. You know, when I sit down and I look back and think through all the work that they were doing, and for someone to put his or her life in a life like that, it's just mind-blowing. You know, I hold my head up high. Well, and he went. I don't know when I can do that. You know, to really strip yourself and bring the interest and the need of others before you. It's very Christ-colored. That is what we see from Christ. You know, he came as a prince, but he entered our world in the form of a sinner, so he can minister to you and minister to me. And that is something that we will always be grateful for Bell. As a church, as a whole in Seventh-day Adventist Church, we hear from the governor how the government acknowledges the ministry of the Tolhurst family and the pioneers back in the days. But when we know the true meaning and the story behind of her death here at Faleloa, it was a real sacrifice. What a life. What a commitment. What a contribution to our church. And as I said, we're not here to mourn and to grieve, but we are here to celebrate. And to thank God, to thank the family. And it's quite amazing. The Tolhurst family and children, they grew up and all became missionaries in various ways. Pastor Lane here was my lecturer at Evildale College. He taught me when I went and did my study. You may know what I did, you still remember. And I can say, part of who I am today was due to the preparation and to the insight that you shared with us. And I'm sure there has been many presidents and pastors, teachers that you ministered to them and you taught them. And I thought we are so honored and so privileged as a church and as a community to have Pearl Tolhurst and Hubert Tolhurst came all the way from Australia and risked their life to minister for our people here at Hawaii, especially Faleloa and for our group. But I want to bring our thought to an end this afternoon, folks. And I'd like to use what the American poet Robert Frost said. This is after he looked at life And he sums it up in 3 words, you know, in which he said, it goes on. Life goes on. You know, friends, God longs to be with us as our life goes on. To show his love for us and to transform us. Then our sorrow and joy and our mourning will end. May God bless you.
By this time we got to hear from Pastor Leonard and Tolhurst for our life skills. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I want to acknowledge our presence with our governor are here this morning, Reverend Paula, and Pastor Zia, our mission president, local pastors, and other dignitaries we have here, visitors, friends, and of course welcome my own family as well. It's important that they're here also, and I'm so happy they're here. Others would like to have been here, but couldn't make it. Governor, your speech this morning was very moving. It produced some tears. Emotional response. Thank you very much. Because this is for us as a family a very emotional time. Because while none of us ever met Pearl, because she died before any of us here today were born, yet the contribution of her life is something that we want to celebrate. It was not a long life, but what she achieved in that short few years that were hers, that she had, was quite remarkable. You'll have to forgive me because I was only 9 years old when I left Tonga from Sydney. So you beg to leave Tonga. Well, I never Tonga Sydney there. But I want to read it to you, something that I prepared, and have patience with me if I don't do it quite the Tongan way. Mano in the lake. Pakawhiawhia, Papito, kia toe folk mai ki Panganini, ai whanua whanaui, ai au, a ia kou tau, aki eni mano fulu mapau. Oku au I heni, mo hoku o whiwhini sisi ko Sharon, mo nehi nekiki oku family Nerida and Roger, Dr. Nerida, Dr. Roger. Oku tau heni ahoni hakanana tua, semi tuli to nau te ao te kia a aki mali o mau tami tamai he mau tuli hone logo tonga a tau whio tiu ka noa mo whai ka manatua Neli ki na o na maui ki mo tu ni pia mo tau motu o te pai na ki ta kuaki a tua ai na ki tua tau usi. I hope you understood some of that. I have the responsibility of giving to you a life sketch The life sketch that I want to give you is two-headed. One, I want to talk about Pearl, and I want to talk about my father, Hubert. Pearl came from one of the first Seventh-day Adventist families in Victoria, in Australia. Her father was a beekeeper. He had hives of bees and used to get honey and sell honey. And some other times he made butter and so on and milk for children to sell. But they were a very poor family. They didn't have much in the way of money. And life was not easy for them. But they brought up 5 girls in that family. And some of the girls went to Avondale College, but some could not go because they didn't have enough money for the fees. But Pearl went to Avondale College, and that's where she met my father. She got a job working in the college printing press. They had a small printing press there. They used to set the type and make magazines, gospel magazines to give out to people to witness. And my father got the job in there too because he knew how to set type. In his boyhood, he had worked in a printing shop in Parks in New South Wales in Australia. And he learned how to set up type. And so he was a good choice to put in that industry when he went to college. And that's where he met Pearl, got to know her because she was setting type and he was setting type. And they chatted and talked and got to know each other quite well and they fell in love. Hubert was born in 1890. That's a long time ago. And his father was a sheep shearer. Take the wool on the sheep back in those days. It was hard work. And you had to have a strong back to do it. He was bending over all the time. And he also was a drover. He used to drive herds of cattle across parts of Australia, sometimes from Queensland up to Darwin, maybe other places, taken to market. He went to school in several schools, but in Parks he was completed his primary school there, but there was no high school for him to go to in that city. His father had died when he was only 8 years old, so he did not have a father after he was 8, which was very hard for the mother to raise up a family of children without a husband. And we can tell some stories about that, but we don't have time to do that here today. But when he was living in Parks and completed primary school and no high school to go to, so he went back and did the last year of primary school a second time, because he was still young. And he got the top, the senior class, and got a medal for his high academic achievements, which I think I still have in my house. I'm keeping it. When he was working at this printing press in Parks, a team of Adventist ministers came to the city, to the town, to run an evangelistic campaign, and they put up a tent for the meetings. And as he was going home from work one evening, when the meeting was being held, he stood outside the meeting and listened to the preacher. And when he went home, he told his mother about what he had heard that night. And she was interested in what he told her, so they decided that they would go to the meeting the next night. And so they both went to the meeting, and they listened to the preaching of the Adventist message, and they decided that that was the message that they could accept and believe, and so they became Seventh-day Adventists and were some of the first members in that town to join the church. When he got a little older, he wanted to go to Avondale College, where he met Pearl. And to get money to go to school in those days, to pay your fees, he got on a push bike and with some friends went way out into the back parts of New South Wales, where houses sometimes are 2, 3, 4, 5 miles apart. And there was a lot of driving to get to one house. And then he tried to sell them some Christian books. And that's how he earned his money for fees doing cold water work as a student. When he graduated from Avondale in 1914, Pearl graduated with him in the same graduating class. They both graduated together. And a few days later, they got married. But they had received a call to go to Tonga. You'll hear something about that call from Dr. Roger here a little later on. They came out here to Tonga in 1915, arriving in Tonga on February 3, 1915. He came to Faleloa, here in Paula, and taught in a little school, but only had boys in the school. And this was something that was very much on the mind and thinking of his wife, Paula. She kept telling him, we have to get the school open for girls as well. She wanted to see the girls educated the same as the boys, not just the boys. She's very much in favour of girl education, and she worked till eventually the mission around opened up schooling for girls as well, and the girls have been blessed with the schooling that they could get at our church schools in the Beulah in the years since that time. While living here for 4 years in Faleloa, he entered the life of the community. He taught the boys English in school and said to them, I'll teach you English in school if you teach me Tongan. And so at the end of 1 year of teaching the class of boys, he preached his first sermon in Tongan language. So he learned the Tongan language very well. And he could say Tongan tongue twisters very well also. He understood the Tongan grammar. And another thing, he came to understand Tongan culture. And he was very supportive of Tongan cultural practices that were not conflicting in any way with Christianity. That's not the record of all missionaries that came to Tonga. Some of them wanted to change some cultures that didn't need to be changed. My father defended the keeping of those cultural practices that you have, that you still have, like the wearing of tavala and so on. We still see that here in Tonga. It's a cultural practice. It's one of your distinguishing marks. When you see a Tongan overseas and he's got his tavala on, I know immediately he's from Tonga. Because only in Tonga do they have that cultural practice. And so he defended those practices. He also used to go to the next island, that guy, but sometimes by boat. But he also used to go out of the horse out on the reef in low tide, and on the reef, you know, the old route that some people still use today, I'm told, and come back into the island that way. And one day the horse trod on some coral and hurt the horse's hoof, and it went like this and fell into the deep hole in the water. My father went under the water, came up, and the Tongan boy that was with him said, you stay horse, horsey can swim. You stay horse, horsey can swim. And my father said, I stayed horse all I knew how. I hung up with the rope with the horse around the place, and the swim swam to a place where he could climb out on the rocks and made his way. He also capsized in the boat, I think, going from Paula to the next island, the island. And the boat capsized, and the Tongan boy jumped in the water and helped to rescue him, and so that he didn't drown. Then one day, after about 4 years here, a message came to him that there was a sickness in one family. So he went to see that family. And that was what we call today the Spanish flu. That went around the world 1919, after World War I. And they say that it killed some people don't know how many people died around the world. But it's been said that in 4 months, that sickness killed more people than World War I killed in 4 years of fighting. I saw one figure that 1,200 people died in Tonga. Another figure I saw was over 2,000 Tongans died in that epidemic. It went through Australia, it went through New Zealand, and thousands of people were dying. And so both my father and his wife, Pearl, got the Spanish flu. And they had to go to bed because they were so sick. But father would get up and nurse his wife. When he got too sick, he'd go back to bed and she would struggle out and nurse him. And then she'd go back to bed. He'd get out and try and nurse her. But there was one family, I don't know that they have the right name, but where my father wrote the story in the poem that he wrote, which I'll read to you later, he called it the man called Moses. Now, I don't know if that's the right name or not, or whether some other name should be used, but that's the name that he put in the poem. He used to bring him water and fill up his water jug every day, and also bring some food for him and his wife when they were sick. And then she died. And my father was so sick, he could hardly stand up, he was very weak. But the Tongans in the village said to him, you have to be brave, you have to conduct the funeral because there's no other Whaikakau here to do it. So my father conducted the funeral service for his own wife. Can you imagine that? Very difficult. And then he went down to the capital, stayed there with some Langi folk for a while, and then he came back and opened up the school again. As he got his strength back, started to teach, but the church office in Australia wrote to him and said, you come back to Australia. So he went back to Australia and he worked in Victoria Conference for about 4 years. And while he was there, he courted my mother. Now, my mother was a younger sister of his first wife. He knew a good family when he found them, you see. And so then he married my mother and adopted the girl that they were planning to adopt in the first marriage. And the girl born in Australia needed a home, and they adopted her, and they brought her back out here with them to Tonga. Came back to Tonga, but when he came back to Tonga, he did not come here, he went to Latu. And one day somebody brought a little cat, a little kitten to him that was sick, very sick. And my father, loving animals, was trying to get it well and giving it some milk to drink, and it bit him on the finger. And from that cat bite, he got general poisoning of his body. And became very sick. So sick that the doctor in Bilbao said to him, if you stay here in Tonga, we will bury you here. Go to New Zealand, get some medical help. This was before we had antibiotics. No penicillin or other antibiotics to use. So he went down to Tonga, from Tonga down to New Zealand, and lived down there for 5 years. It took 1 year for him to get well. And then he worked as a pastor and evangelistic team in New Zealand for 4 years. And during that time, their first daughter was born. So they had one adopted daughter, then they had one of their own born in New Zealand. One born in Australia, one born in New Zealand. And then, can you imagine what happened? He came back to Tonga again. He couldn't keep away from here. He loved the Tongan people. He learned their language, knew their culture, and he loved the Tongan people. We came back again the third time. And then when 5 years were up, he had a furlough, went to Australia. By that time, the family had grown, and I was the baby. So I was taken off from Tonga to Australia, went into Queensland, so New South Wales, when I was about 1 year and 6 months old. I don't remember anything about that visit, but then he came back to Tonga again. He spent another 5 years here. And during that time, more children were born. 2 more children were born. Out of 7 children, 5 were born in Tonga. 5 of us. Some have said that I ought to get Tongan passport and become a citizen here. But anyway, one time they were having a meeting in Australia, of a church meeting, and they wrote him a letter and they said that you have been appointed as a delegate from the islands to come to this big conference meeting that we have planned. So come in. My father wrote to them and said, I can come in for the meeting and then come back, but in 6 months' time my furlough is due and then I go back to Australia. I have a family of children here in Tonga. They're not going to a proper school. Our mother was teaching us because she was a trained school teacher. So we were doing correspondence lessons and so on, and she was teaching. So he suggested to them, can I bring my family in now and let them get some schooling and then go back to Tonga for myself for 6 months. And then I'll come in on furlough and have my furlough, and then we'll all go back to Tonga. That would give my family about 1 year of schooling. And the leaders of the church said yes. So we all went into Australia. Went down to Warburton, and then later went to Adelaide, and Dad went to the conference, then he came back to Tonga all by himself. Supposed to be for 6 months, and then go on his furlough. But you see, he had Bernard Hadfield and his wife working with him in Tonga at that time, and Mrs. Hadfield got sick. And the doctor said, you must go to New Zealand to get medical help down there. Off you go. So they got on the boat and left there. My father was left here on his own, and there was nobody to look after the mission while he went away for furlough. So he was stuck here. And it took the folk in the division office or union office over in Australia about 12 months to find somebody they could send out to relieve him. So he was here for 18 months by himself, without his wife and without his family, while we were all in Australia. That's the sacrifice that he made so that we could get some schooling. And I remember when he came back and joined us, and my younger brother didn't even know who his father was. My younger brother Athel, that was here in Tonga last year. He didn't know who this man was. He came into the house. But, well, he came to know who he was later, but first he didn't know who he was. So we came back to Tonga again. And then my father was called to go to New Zealand to work for the Maori people in New Zealand. And so all of us left about 1939, 1940. The war had just started over in Europe, and I remember the Matula ship we sailed on had a gun at the back, about 3-inch gun. Would not fire a very powerful shell, but that was the only defence the ship had. And I remember seeing the crew practising on the gun while we were sailing over the water, hoping that we would not see a German warship or a German submarine on their way to New Zealand. Margaret Gladys Pearl Phillips, born the 10th of March, 1891, and died on the 14th of March, 1919, which is 100 years today since she passed away. We thought we could not get this opportunity to come out to Tonga with some members of my family and to celebrate her life and what she did while she was here. Although she only had a short time here with the Tongan people, she's left an influence which the Governor has talked about in his speech this morning, and her memory is known all over the place. All Adventist families, I think, in the Tongan Tamu and over the Hapai know the story of her sacrifice and the sacrifice that my father made, and the courage that he had to come back here. And he himself nearly died in Tonga 2 times. But you still keep coming back because of his great mercy upon people. God bless you all, my friend.
Governor Paluca, Pastor Bea, Pastor Moimoi, special guests, family, and friends, thank you for coming. I'm going to be reading a poem that was written by Tolhurst called All Those We Love and Much Besides. We love the sounds of island words, the sights of island faces, the happy notes of island birds that sing in pleasant places. We like to sail the sunny seas with gentle breezes blowing. We relish fruit from tropic trees in rich profusion growing. We love the bright hibiscus blooms, the scent of tropic flowers, the stately palms with waving plumes, the lure of shady bowers, the deep blue of tropic seas, the glare of coral beaches, the varied greens of island trees with fringing mangrove beaches. We've seen the sea all turn to gold, the hour of sunset gracing. We've seen the gentle moonlight cold, a silver pathway tracing on waters of the ocean wide or dark lagoon enhancing, and phosphorus on evening tide like countless torches dancing. How oft we've heard the busy taps of tapa mallets' wings, and lanny notes in vibrant raps from neighboring village ringing. Resounding blasts unconscious blown, like streamers' whistles sounding, and booming surf, not weary grown of hard and ceaseless pounding. Though these we love and much besides, of subtle charm and beauty, nor charm nor beauty e'er decides our attitude to duty. Then these a higher call by far adorns the sacred pages, which bid us teach in lands afar the gospel of the ages.
Thank you. Governor Paluca and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for honouring the memory and the service of our grandfather's first love, Pearl Tolhurst, who's very not far from here. My name is Roger Magnuson. Our grandfather had 7 children, and my mother, Naini Tolhurst, is Len Tolhurst's younger sister. Pearl Tolhurst was laid to rest 100 years ago, and she rests on Paluca ancestral land. And so we would like to thank the Paluca family for your kindness as custodians of her grave over the years, and also for your generosity in welcoming us to Hapai today. I didn't realise that Reverend Paluca was the governor of Hapai, but Viliami Paluca told me, and I realised we need to behave ourselves while we're here, especially my cousins Sharon and Nerida. We have a number of other cousins who would have liked to be here, and I'm sorry they can't be, and I'm sure they are too. I think it's fair to say that our family's connection with Tonga looms large in the imagination of many of us. Tonga is a proud part of our family narrative, and we have some other connections with the Paluca family as well that I'll mention in a moment. In my professional life, I've had the opportunity to meet quite a number of Tongans, and to be honest with you, that was part of the reason why I wanted to come and visit Tonga for the first time. I met Viliami Paluca because we were both members of a committee advising the Public Health Division of the Pacific Community. And I'm sorry Viliami was unable to be here today. He's someone I admire greatly. The head of Public Health Division, Paula, is another Tongan. And another member of the committee is Dr. Bill Tangi, the former health minister and now a member of the King's Privy Council. Bill Tangi is greatly respected by my colleagues at the University of Sydney. So here we are in Hapai. It's my first visit to Tonga, and I'm very pleased to be here. My mother was born in Tongatapu. I think she was 8 when they left. Growing up, we had beautiful handcrafted tapa cloth, like the tapa cloth that the governor is sitting on, except we didn't walk on this tapa cloth. It was so beautiful, we hung it on the walls. And so for much of my life, I had memories of Tongan tapa cloth hanging on the walls. And it's amazing to think how old that tapa cloth may be. It may be, 60 or 70 years old. As a boy, I remember going to visit my grandfather, who was retired. He was perhaps in his mid-80s by that stage. He told me stories like the one about nearly drowning when he was crossing between the islands. He also had a very large shell collection. Some of the shells were bigger than footballs. They were all polished, they were all beautiful. I don't think you could make off with shells these days. You would probably be arrested. But he took a lot of Tongan shells with him. I suppose they were different days back then. And he would put the shells up to my ear, and I would hear the sound of the sea. The time that my grandfather spent here in Hape and in Babao and in Tongatapu, those were the times of his life. Granddad would read me poems from the book of poetry that he wrote about his time in Tonga. He took delight in the physical beauty of the Tongan Islands, but he returns to his first wife, Pearl, time and time again in the poems. Granddad produced 7 handwritten copies of the book of poetry, and he called it Waving Palms and Scented Breezes. And my copy is 106 pages long. He gave it to my mum and dad nearly 58 years ago in 1961. So here's a copy of one of the 7 books of poetry. By the time I was regularly visiting my grandfather in the 1970s, he was married to his 3rd wife. His 2nd wife, my grandmother, Elsma Ruth Tolhurst, had passed away when I was 2 years old. I'm not sure that my grandfather's 3rd wife really appreciated his continuing focus on Tonga. But as a boy, I was never left in any doubt. His years at Tonga were the adventure of his lifetime. And no time was more precious than the years he spent on this island with Pearl. Come back along the way with me, returning 5 and 40 years. That far day we put to sea, with joy that scarce suppressed our tears. We sailed far out, he wrote, where tropic day breaks clear over sparkling sapphire seas, where trade winds blow and palm trees sway, and orange blossoms scent the breeze, where Tonga's lovely emerald isles spread over these seas for miles and miles. So hand in hand we walked a while, so short a time to me it seems, upon a verdant tropic isle, our future bright with happy dreams, and in our heart there rang a song as on life's path we swung along, for we were young and we were strong. And then the poem turns black, and he spares nothing as he writes about the agony of losing his wife. The Tongans said I should be brave and take the service at the grave. A talk on endless life I gave. The irony is that not one of us in our family would even be here today but for the death of this remarkable woman in the great flu epidemic of 1919, 100 years ago. So the Tolhurst family lost one of its own, and she is buried here on this beautiful coral island on Paloka ancestral lands. And Viliami Paloka also shared with me that a member of your family, Reverend Paloka, your family lost an aunt, Alissi Tapusi, who was taken by an Adventist minister, adopted by an Adventist minister and his family initially to New Zealand. My cousin Nerida was able to find out the name that she took in Australia and then to trace what happened to her, where she lived and where she was buried. In Australia, Alicia became Alicia Foster, taking the name of her adoptive father, who was a minister. She died in 1979. She visited Tonga later in life, I understand, but not as the person she would have been. And I see that, Reverend Paloka, as tragic. It is a tragedy for your family. Today we are commemorating events that happened long ago, but what remains unchanged is the beauty of this place and the warmth of the Tongan people and the strange circumstances of life that make us who we are. In closing, my Uncle Len has chosen a poem for me to read from Grandfather's book of Tongan poetry, and I'm going to try to read it in his handwriting from the handwritten book that he gave to my parents. I'm called to Tonga, Mother dear, but lo am I so far to go. As you grow old, I'd fain be near to aid you when your step is slow. No son, you must the call obey. When you left home, I knew 'twould be, and you'll return again someday, and then perhaps be nearer me. So off we sailed, my Pearl and I, and never saw our parents more. Within 3 months did Mother die, and Pearl sleeps on a coral shore.
I'm not going to greet you in Tongan, but I want to greet you in English. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Governor Paula, Pastor Dean, selected guests, welcome to this lovely service. This came about 2 years ago. My cousin Merida and I look at ancestry and try to find out a little bit about what's going on with our grandparents and a little bit about their story. And so when we discovered that it was 1919, we thought, well, that's a year and a bit away. This was in 2017. And so that sort of started the little idea that maybe we should come out. So I talked with my dad and we talked with some of the other cousins and things, and we thought it might be a good idea to come out. One of the things that my grandfather taught me, Roger talked about the shells, the conch shells. My grandfather taught me to play the conch shell. Probably badly, but I'm now a pretty good French horn player because it's the same mechanism to start the sound. And Paula is here, and he was in my brass band, and I conduct brass bands and orchestras back in Australia. So that was a very special just memory that I had. I remember my grandfather right up until almost he died at 91 years of age. He was always telling stories of Tongan. He was always bursting into Tongan. And we'd be going, I don't understand you better tell us in English what's going on. But he loved telling stories about things that he used to do when he was out here. Yes, and we've heard all the stories about going out on the horse and nearly drowning, stories of going in boats and having some issues. Because it was a very rough sea, he would hold the centre pole of the yacht, and Dad tells us that a little pig would come up and try and sleep with him, and my grandfather would knock him away, and he'd come back because he wanted some warmth as he was coming to and from the islands. So one of the things I said to my dad, I said, well, you know, your generation looked after the Faleloa church, and I think about in the 1970s, the family, his cousins and brothers, put together money to rebuild the Faleloa church, and I said, well, now it's our turn. And so with emails and Facebook, we whipped around and I said, you know, we need to look after, and my generation needs to look after the church. So that's why we're here today as well, is to celebrate. I know the church was badly damaged in 2017, and so it's nice now to see it looking really good. The poem I'm going to read you, if I can get through it, it's called The Winds and the Waves of Life. This is one of Hubert's poems. I'll sing you a song of the ocean wide, a song of the rollicking sea. I'll sing of the winds and the rolling tide in notes that are joyous and free. A song that we sang when our hearts were young and hopeful and happy were we.
When off to the tropical isles far flung, we sailed over the billowy sea. I don't know how they travelled in those little boats, they're just beyond me. We waved a farewell as we sailed away, far off into promising years, with never a thought that a coming day would change our rejoicing to tears. But ill will the winds blew, and the waves rolled high, and silenced the song by us sung. For gone was my joy with our sad goodbye, while both our hearts were so young. But list to the sound of the pounding sea that breaks on the treacherous reef, while breeze dealing pestilence rides the breeze with sickness, disaster and grief. Then I sang a song of a lonely grave where sleep on a tropical shore. Then everyone I mourned who was calm and brave through all the longest illness she bore. We mourn not as those who, in hopeless gloom, believe not the promise of God, but ere long she enters the silent tomb, the way of salvation to trod.
Thank you.
One of my nephews would very much like to be here, and he was thinking of coming and trying to get the money together for his fare to come here, but he did not succeed in getting the money. He's retired now, and when you're retired, and you know, he could get a government pension, but he couldn't get a government pension because his wife is still working. So he's got to wait for her to retire before he can get a government pension. So he didn't have the money to come. He's very sorry, but he sent a message to us, and trying to relay to you here today some of the thoughts that were in the message that he sent. On behalf of the extended family, this, by the way, comes from Colin Richardson, for those that know him. On behalf of the extended family who could not be present, I want to send my best wishes for the program. We'll be thinking of you and remembering Pearl. We greatly admired Hubert for the bravery he showed facing his grief. In the 4 years that he was in Faleloa, he fell so much in love with the Tongan people that he spent almost 20 years of his life here, thoroughly learning their language and culture. He inspired all of his children and many grandchildren to go into church work and to work for God. Some of his grandchildren, all of his 7 children worked for the church or were married to people who worked for the church, sometimes both. And some of his grandchildren, Colin Richardson and Roy Richardson, and Kerry Long, maybe others that I couldn't recall, have been missionaries in foreign countries. And Roger himself and Karen Carter have been working in public health in the Pacific Islands. So that's a contribution. 21 grandchildren that we had, because now the great-grandchildren are turning up. And the great-great-grandchildren are turning up, and even the great-great-great are arriving, because I'm also a great-grandfather. I had 2 great-grandsons, and a third one, a third great-grandchild is coming, be here in a few more months. May God bless you all, but I want to read as I close the poem that my father wrote about the sickness that Pearl endured. It's called As the Thoughts Turn Back Along the Years. This is perhaps the best record of the illness that she had that we have. As thoughts turn back along the years to bring their joys and sorrows near, from out of the misty past appears the form of one to me so dear, that passing time can ne'er erase or efface or dim the image of her face and charm of unaffected grace. The sanctification I recall, her gift of kindly service rare, while earned the warm esteem of all who did her ministrations share. Devoted helpmeet, mate, comrade, wife. On peaceful isles, through years of strife, she lived and worked and gave her life. Her rippling laugh and tuneful voice came ringing down the years to me, no more to make my heart rejoice, or would it with her melody, though oft they brought a poignant pain. 'Tis now long years since she last sang, and round our home her laughter rang. Come back along the way with me, returning 45 years after her death that he wrote this. To that far day we put to sea with joy that scarce expressed our tears. Enthusiastic to explore for Christ the future, but ashore, where parents we might see no more. We sailed out far where tropic day breaks clear or sparkling sapphire seas, where trade winds blow, palm trees sway, and orange blossoms and scent the breeze, where Tonga's lovely emerald isles spread o'er those seas for miles and miles, and everywhere fair nature smiles. Midst scenes of island beauty there, in never-ending summer time, we gathered ocean's harvest fair upon the shifting sands of time. The treasures that with zeal we sought were precious souls whom Christ had bought, including girls and boys we taught. So hand in hand we walked a while, so short a time it seemed to me, upon a verdant island, tropic isle, our future bright with happy dreams, and in our hearts there rang the song, as on life's path we swung along, for we were young and we were strong. Then old Tolhurst, moseying through the coral sea lanes on her run, from Auckland brought pneumatic flu, and ere the island trip was done, and spread round from port to port, but no one had an anxious thought, or realised what she had brought. A few days later, at our door, a common lost man reined his steed as his horse, in earnest accents to implore that I at once with him proceed, for in his village the 3 men lay upon their backs in sad array of some strange scourge of the hapless prey. So with him I rode along to give some help that summer day, nor dreamed that in that house ere long 5 pairs of eyes would close for aye. And thrice on memory's errand sent, to that sad stricken home I went, and then I too fell ill and spent. Had I refused the aid he sought for those in need that day, the malady had then been brought to me and mine some other way. To me and mine some other way. It mattered not for weal or woe to those who went to meet the foe and those who stayed afraid to go. The pestilence so quickly spread, it seemed to ride the very breeze, and soon were scores of victims dead, and hundreds stricken with disease. In scarce a home, no sick one lay, and rolling bells scarce ceased a day as mourners bore their dead away. For ere its ruthless course was stayed, it filled 1,200 Tongan graves, where toa trees cast their scanty shade, and sighed beside the moaning waves, sad wailing tones the breezes bore, sad faces all the people wore, and death held sway from shore to shore. Of those who in our village dwelt, the first was I to be attacked, but soon we both its fever felt, that is, himself and Pearl, his wife, and by its pains were sorely racked, and as for days we helplessly, old Moses from across the way refilled our water jug each day. And then from normal speech I strayed, as he went delirious. My wife arose and treatments gave. Relieved, I soon became dismayed, as her condition changed to grave, meaning serious. So thus did fate our roles reverse, the patient now becoming nurse, the nurse the patient, only worse. For came a day when I awoke to see pneumonia's symptoms clear. To my tortured heart they spoke of peril for my partner dear. Her lips by fever parched and cracked, her racing pulse that never slacked, and gasping breath for air she lacked. With hydrotherapy and prayer, the crisis passed and she improved, but still, despite the utmost care, death's threat was never far removed. For months, some fever ere remained, that rapid pulse was ne'er restrained, and wasted form no strength regained. How oft at night, through anxious hours, she choked or coughed her strength away, and then what weariness was ours, as unrefreshed we faced the day. No doctor's skill was at our call, no doctor here in those days, and now I her quite recall. I doubt she could, one could have helped at all. He doubts the doctor could have saved her. I asked one day where we should go when strength returned and strength revived. She longed for home and wished to know, had some relieving help arrived. No one has come, I had to say. She sadly said, then we must stay. Within 3 days, she passed away. The sudden gasping sound I heard, and quickly stood beside her bed. I stood at her bed beside, but not in time or even a word of farewell as she did ere she died. She couldn't even speak anything before she died. For though I came on speeding feet, death's work was rapid and complete. And her brave heart soon ceased to beat. For months did hope my fears repel, but with that hope forever past, a grief too deep for words to tell, swept all my stricken heart at last. And when in sorrow's night we mourn, the brighter hope of heaven born points forward to eternal dawn. To bear her in her place of rest, the chosen senior boys prepared, when village people forward pressed, and eagerly that favour shared. Thomas said I should be brave, and take the service of the grave, the talk on endless life I gave. She slept these 40 years and more, now it's 100 years. Because this was written more than 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And ever restless sea besides, on Faleloa's farm and Prince shore. The village where she lived and died, but with the Lord's redeemed who sleep in dusty beds and mighty deep. She'll awake again, no more to weep. Good friends upon a neighbouring isle provided change and sweet relief, inviting me to rest a while, away from scenes of stress and grief. So grateful to them I went, who ne'er could know how much it meant of comfort and encouragement. My waiting school now beckoned me and occupied my time and care till came a call across the sea from my Australian homeland fair, that twice I back to Tonga went, where many happy years were spent in mission work and management. Near 20 years have hurried by since last we left the Tongan shore, and long we've ceased to wonder why, or sorrow, or over what has been. For all that comes of good or ill, permitted is by God's good will, His purpose for us to fulfill. And gone forever with the past, our joys and sorrows tasted then, to life beyond the tomb at last we look, to meet our dead again. The grave cannot its victims keep, for death is not eternal sleep. With such a hope, we cease to weep.
Tau whamaro na pe e ki koan, kari mauroa o me whalangi. Kai tupe mua ke tau whanamoa si tohinoa, ka mai mau ko tuku mai ki whaamiri koen, e whalau mai, e maha whalau, ke whai e whamanatua, e tau te au, e nao mamai, e moe peo koe mi. This is one of the hymns that Hubert Tolhurst has translated. It's in our number 277. Ko I whalawhala hima I te tau whaosea ki ai himi ai kātoanga o I whiawhikoini. Ke tau hiwa mai e taha e ngahi review a Hubert Tolhurst me he whapapa lea himi whapapalangi ki ana whakatonga. Te tau hiwa I hono uangi au whitu mo furu mā whitu e himi. I toi himi o sesa whitu. Uangi au whitu mo furu mā whitu e himi. E spela tahataha te mea ngahi vesi. E tata te pēke mou hiwa tahataha mai ani. Whalawhala si iso ke nau whiewhia. Te ko tohi tongi a nau hi ngoa. O I tohi o mo ui o piherangi. Ko tohi nai iai. O tau ki ngoa. Ko tohi ape o tau ki ngoa. I tohi o mo ui o piherangi. Whalawhala asi so ke na
This is my newest book that was published last year. The list did one to Russia. One to the president of the church. And here is one more to the ladies. What I want you to do is write your name on it, and later on, when we come back, I'll autograph it. That's my latest book. It was published last year. I'd like to give it in honor of Tolhurst. Thank you. I'll write your name on it.